What happens when a man who has everything throws away the one person who truly mattered? Damien Blackwood, a titan of industry, saw his wife as just another asset to be managed. On a cold Tuesday morning, he pushed divorce papers across a mahogany desk, coldly severing their ties, completely unaware of the secret she carried. He thought he was closing a chapter. But 6 months later, celebrating the deal of a lifetime, his world shatters. Live on a Bloomberg Businessweek broadcast the new CEO of the company he's just acquired is revealed. It's his pregnant ex-wife, and she's not just back in his life, she's his new boss. The pen felt like a shard of ice in Isabella Rossi's hand. It was a Mont Blanc, Damien's favorite brand, of course. Everything in this room on the 50th floor of Blackwood Tower was an extension of him, cold, expensive, and designed to make one feel small. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sprawling Manhattan, a kingdom he believed he had conquered, one hostile takeover at a time. "Just sign." Isabella Damien's voice was devoid of emotion, the same tone he used when closing a multi-million-dollar deal. He wasn't looking at her, but at his Patek Philippe watch, as if her heartbreak was an inconvenient delay in his schedule. "Marcus has reviewed the terms. They are, as I instructed, exceedingly generous." Generous. That was the word he used. A lump sum payment that could buy a small island, a luxury apartment in the Upper West Side she never wanted, and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it felt like a gag order on her very soul. He was buying her silence, her absence. Isabella's gaze drifted from the stark black ink on the page to her husband of 3 years. Damien Blackwood was a man carved from ambition and success. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his Tom Ford suit immaculate. He was handsome, devastatingly so, but the warmth she'd once seen in his eyes had long been replaced by the cold glint of calculation. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. For a while, she was an asset. The beautiful, intelligent, socially graceful wife who looked good on his arm at galas. Now she was a liability. Her desire for a real partnership, for a family, for a life beyond his shadow had become inconvenient. Her hand trembled as she rested it on her stomach, a gesture so subtle Damien didn't even notice. Beneath the fine silk of her blouse, a secret was growing. A tiny, precious life. Their baby. She had found out a week ago, a day after he'd announced he was calling his lawyers. The irony was a cruel, twisting knife in her gut. For 2 years she had begged him to start a family, only to be told it wasn't the right time for the portfolio. The market wasn't stable, he'd say, or a big acquisition needed his full attention. She had planned a special dinner to tell him, hoping foolishly that the news of his own child might break through the fortress he'd built around his heart. But he never came home that night. He'd texted a curt message about a crisis at the Singapore office. The next morning, his lawyer Marcus Vance had called her to schedule this very meeting. Isabella Marcus, a man with a face as smooth and unreadable as polished marble, prompted gently. "It's the final page." She looked at Damien one last time, searching for a flicker of doubt, a shadow of regret. There was nothing, only impatience. He wanted this over with. He wanted to get back to his empire. A tear she hadn't realized was forming, escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. She would not give him the satisfaction of a breakdown. Her pain was hers alone, and so was her secret. He didn't deserve to know. He didn't deserve to be a father. Not like this. With a deep, shuddering breath, she uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib against the thick, creamy paper was the only sound in the room. Isabella Rossi, Her signature was a little shaky, but it was done. She pushed the papers back across the vast expanse of the mahogany desk. "Done," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "Excellent." Damien stood up, straightening his tie. He finally looked at her, a brief, dismissive glance. "My driver will take you to the apartment. The keys and codes are in the welcome packet Marcus prepared. I trust you'll be discreet." Discreet. He meant disappear. Isabella stood on legs that felt like jelly. She didn't look at him again. She walked out of the office, past the silent, judging eyes of his executive assistants, and into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, sealing her off from that life forever, she let out the sob she had been holding back. Her hand went back to her stomach, a protective, fierce gesture. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered to the empty mirrored elevator. "And I promise you we're going to be okay. I promise I will be enough." Downstairs, the city that had once felt like a shared dream now seemed alien and hostile. Damien's driver, a kind man named Arthur, whom she'd always liked, held the door to the Rolls-Royce open for her. She shook her head. "No, thank you, Arthur," she said, managing a weak smile. "I'll take a cab." She needed the anonymity. She needed to be just another face in the crowd, not Damien Blackwood's discarded wife being delivered to her gilded cage. As she hailed a yellow taxi, she took one last look up at the gleaming, arrogant spire of Blackwood Tower. It wasn't an ending, it was an eviction. And in that moment of profound loss, a tiny, hard seed of resolve began to plant itself in the barren soil of her heart. He had underestimated her. They all had. And one day he would realize just how colossal a mistake that was. The first few weeks were a blur of grief and morning sickness. The luxury apartment Damien had provided felt less like a home and more like a beautifully furnished prison. Every sleek surface and designer piece of furniture screamed his name, his money, his control. Isabella sold most of it, replacing it with simpler, more comfortable things that didn't carry the weight of her past. Her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted art curator with a fierce sense of loyalty, was her rock. "So what's the plan, Izzy?" she asked one evening, sipping wine while Isabella drank chamomile tea. "You can't just sit here and let him win. He doesn't get to write your story." "He already did," Isabella said, looking out at the city lights. "I'm the tragic ex-wife with a massive settlement." "No, that's a character in his play. You need to flip the script." "What about that brilliant mind of yours? The one that got you a first-class degree in economics from Wharton. The one you put on a shelf to help him build his empire." Chloe was right. Before Damien Isabella had been on a fast track to a formidable career in venture capital. She had a keen eye for undervalued assets and emerging tech. She'd spent the first year of their marriage helping him vet deals, poring over balance sheets and offering insights he'd initially praised, then later dismissed as he grew more arrogant. He had co-opted her talent, then discarded her when she wanted to be more than just an unofficial, unpaid consultant. The seed of resolve that had been planted on the day of the divorce began to sprout. Fueled by hormones and a burning need to build a secure future for her child, Isabella started to make a plan. It began with a phone call she'd been dreading. Her maternal grandmother, a formidable woman who had run her own successful textile business in Italy, had passed away 2 years prior. She had always been wary of Damien seeing a ruthlessness in him that Isabella had mistaken for ambition. In her will, she had left Isabella a substantial inheritance, but with a complex condition, it was to be held in a blind trust, inaccessible to her, as long as she was married to Damien Blackwood. Her grandmother had foreseen a day like this. Accessing the trust was a complicated legal process, one designed to be difficult. It took 2 months of painstaking work with a team of Swiss lawyers, but finally the confirmation came through. The amount was staggering. Far more than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a safety net, it was a war chest. Isabella didn't want revenge, not in the petty sense. She wanted to build something. Something that was hers. Something that would prove to herself and to the world that she was more than Damien Blackwood's wife. She started small, working from a makeshift office in her spare bedroom. She reactivated her old network, reaching out to contacts from university, and her brief time in the finance world. She was met with some skepticism, but her insights were as sharp as ever. She made a few discreet, brilliant investments in tech startups, her instincts proving unerring. Her capital grew. Her target soon came into focus, a mid-sized, publicly traded tech firm called Innovate Dynamics. It was a company she and Damien had once discussed acquiring. Damien had scoffed, saying it was fundamentally broken, its leadership uninspired. But Isabella had seen something he hadn't, a portfolio of groundbreaking patents, a brilliant but under-supported R&D department, and a loyal customer base. It wasn't broken. It was mismanaged. It was a diamond in the rough. And as fate would have it, Blackwood Enterprises was once again circling Innovate Dynamics, preparing a hostile takeover bid. The news was all over the financial press. Damien was positioning it as the capstone of his year, a move that would solidify his dominance in the sector. He thought it was a done deal. Isabella saw her opening. She wouldn't try to outbid him directly. That was his game, and he was the master of it. She would be smarter. She would be surgical. Through a series of shell corporations and a discreet private equity firm in Geneva that owed her a favor, she began to quietly buy up Innovate Dynamics stock. It was a slow, methodical process, executed in small blocks to avoid tripping any alarms. While Damien was preparing his public, bombastic takeover announcement, Isabella was silently gaining control from the inside. Her pregnancy was advancing. By the 5th month, she had a noticeable bump, a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. Some days were hard. Exhaustion and loneliness were constant companions. But every time she felt like giving up, she would feel a tiny kick, a flutter of movement inside her, and her resolve would harden like steel. She recruited a small, fiercely loyal team. Among them was Julian Croft, the brilliant but frustrated head of R&D at Innovate Dynamics. She had reached out to him secretly, selling him on her vision, not just to save the company, but to unleash its true potential. He saw in her the leadership he'd been craving and became her inside man, feeding her information about the company's real strengths and Damien's strategic weaknesses. The final piece of the puzzle was securing a majority stake. This required a bold move, convincing the company's aging founder and largest single shareholder, a man named Arthur Kensington, to sell his shares to her anonymous entity rather than succumb to Damien's bid. She flew to Boston to meet him now, 6 months pregnant and unable to hide it. She didn't try. She walked into the meeting at the stuffy old Bostonian club and laid out her entire plan. She told him about Damien's strategy to gut the company, sell off its patents, and fire most of the staff. Then she laid out her vision to invest, to innovate, to build on the legacy he had created. Kensington, a shrewd old man, listened intently. He looked at her pregnant belly, at the fire in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "This is a deeply personal fight, isn't it?" Isabella met his gaze. "The most successful ventures always are," she replied. He smiled a slow, knowing grin. He had seen enough of Damien Blackwood in the papers to understand. "You've got a deal, young lady," he said, shaking her hand. "Give that corporate pirate hell." With Kensington's shares, she crossed the 51% threshold. She had done it. Innovate Dynamics was hers. The board was legally obligated to accept her as the new controlling shareholder and CEO. The trap was set. All she had to do was wait for Damien to walk into it. Damien Blackwood was having an excellent day. An excellent 6 months, in fact. Life without Isabella was efficient. There were no more emotional conversations to navigate, no more dinners he was expected to attend, no more talk of us. His life had been streamlined back to its purest form work. His penthouse apartment, a marvel of glass and steel overlooking Central Park, was silent and orderly. His schedule was packed from dawn until midnight, with meetings, calls, and strategic sessions. He was thriving. Blackwood Enterprises had posted record profits for 2 consecutive quarters. The divorce had been a clean cut. He had been generous as promised, and in return Isabella had vanished. He hadn't heard a word from her or about her. He assumed she was living a quiet, comfortable life of leisure on his dime, probably lunching with socialites and vacationing in the Maldives. It was for the best. She was a lovely woman, but she lacked the requisite ruthlessness for his world. Today was the culmination of his latest triumph, the acquisition of Innovate Dynamics. His team had just finalized the hostile bid. It was aggressive, almost insulting, but calculated to perfection. The company was weak, its board fractured. They would have no choice but to accept. He pictured the headlines, "Blackwood conquers tech sector." The Midas touch of Damien Blackwood. He was in his office, the same one where Isabella had signed her life away, hosting a small celebratory gathering with his senior executives and his lawyer, Marcus. Champagne was being poured. A toast, Marcus said, raising his glass. To Damien, the undisputed king. Damien allowed himself a rare, tight smile. "It's not done until it's done, Marcus, but the fundamentals are strong." He took a sip of the vintage Dom Perignon. It tasted like victory. His large-screen TV, always tuned to Bloomberg, was playing in the background, with the volume on low. Analyst reports, stock tickers, and market news provided a constant, soothing hum to his life. "And now for our top story on Bloomberg Markets, the close." The anchor's voice cut through the celebratory chatter. Damien glanced at the screen, mildly interested. "In a move that has stunned Wall Street." The anchor continued, her expression serious. "A surprise buyout of tech firm Innovate Dynamics has just been confirmed, thwarting a widely anticipated hostile takeover bid from powerhouse Blackwood Enterprises." The room went silent. Champagne flutes paused halfway to mouths. Damien's smile vanished. He turned his full attention to the screen, his heart beginning to pound with a strange mix of anger and confusion. Thwarted, impossible. The acquisition was orchestrated by a previously unknown Swiss private equity firm, Phoenix Holdings, the anchor explained. Sources say the firm quietly amassed a controlling 51% stake over the past several months. The board of Innovate Dynamics has convened an emergency session and has just voted to install the CEO of Phoenix Holdings as their new chairman and CEO effective immediately. Damien's knuckles were white as he gripped his glass. Who the hell was Phoenix Holdings? He had the best corporate intelligence team in the world. How could they have missed this? "This is a masterclass in stealth acquisition," a financial analyst on the show commented. "Whoever is behind Phoenix Holdings played this perfectly. They used Blackwood's very public bid as a smokescreen." "We're getting word now that the new CEO is about to make a live statement," the anchor announced. "We're going to her now." The screen cut to a live feed. A woman was stepping up to a podium, the Innovate Dynamics logo emblazoned behind her. She was poised, confident, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, professional bob. She wore a tailored navy blue dress that was both powerful and elegant. And she was visibly pregnant. Damien's mind struggled to process the image. The face was familiar, but the context was so alien, so utterly impossible, that his brain refused to connect the dots. It couldn't be. Then she spoke, and the world tilted on its axis. "Good afternoon." The voice was smooth, clear, and carried an unmistakable note of command. It was a voice he knew better than his own, but one he had never heard used with such force. "My name is Isabella Rossi, and I am the new CEO of Innovate Dynamics." The champagne flute slipped from Damien's fingers and shattered on the marble floor. No one in the room dared to breathe. They stared slack-jawed from the television screen to the frozen, ashen face of their boss. On the screen, Isabella was laying out her vision for the company with unnerving precision. She spoke of leveraging untapped patents, of empowering the R&D division, of a new era of growth and innovation. She was brilliant. She was formidable. She was everything he had told himself she wasn't. But all Damien could see was her, his ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed and discarded, standing before the world holding the prize he had coveted, and carrying a child, his child. The timeline clicked into place with sickening clarity. The slight weight she'd gained, her emotional state. She had been pregnant when she signed the papers. She had been pregnant, and he had pushed her away with cold, clinical indifference. A wave of nausea so profound it buckled his knees washed over him. This wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. This was a reckoning. The woman he had relegated to a footnote in his life story had just ripped out the final chapters and started writing her own, with him as a minor, vanquished character. "Damien." Marcus whispered, his face pale. "What is this?" Damien couldn't answer. He was staring at Isabella's face on the screen, at the calm, unyielding strength in her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, Damien Blackwood, the undisputed king, felt a foreign and terrifying emotion. Fear. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters. For Damien, it was a summons. His company, Blackwood Enterprises, was now merely a significant minority shareholder in a company run by his ex-wife. He was contractually obligated to attend. The irony was so thick he felt like he was choking on it. He spent the weekend in a state of controlled fury. He had his intelligence team work around the clock, digging into Phoenix Holdings, digging into Isabella. The report that came back was both infuriating and begrudgingly impressive. They traced the funding back to a blind trust from her maternal grandmother. It was clean, untouchable, and brilliant. She had used his own dismissiveness of her family against him. He'd never bothered to learn the details of her inheritance, because he'd never considered her finances or her family important. He rewatched the press conference a dozen times. He saw the subtle way she rested her hand on her stomach, the same way she had done in his office that final day. The gesture he had ignored. How could he have been so blind? The question haunted him, chipping away at the foundation of his self-assuredness. He arrived at the Innovate Dynamics building, a modest glass and steel structure that suddenly felt like the most imposing fortress in the world. As he walked into the boardroom, all conversation ceased. The existing board members, men and women, he had been planning to fire looked at him with a mixture of fear and schadenfreude, and then she walked in. Isabella was the picture of corporate power. She wore a cream-colored sheath dress with a matching blazer that elegantly accommodated her 6-month pregnancy. Her demeanor was crisp, professional, and utterly unreadable. Her eyes swept across the room and settled on him for a fraction of a second. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of emotion. It was like looking at a stranger. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. She took her seat at the head of the table, the chairman's seat. "Let's begin." The meeting was a master class in control. Isabella, flanked by her new CFO, and Julian Croft, the newly promoted Chief Technology Officer, laid out her 100-day plan. It was audacious, aggressive, and meticulously detailed. She systematically dismantled Damien's proposed strategy, pointing out its short-sightedness and flaws with surgical precision, never once mentioning his name. She referred to Blackwood Enterprises only as our new minority partner. Damien felt his power evaporating with every word she spoke. He was used to commanding rooms like this, to being the one with all the answers. Now he was just another board member expected to listen. He tried to interject, to question a projection or challenge a premise. "Mr. Blackwood." She cut him off, her tone freezing. "We have a full agenda. Please hold your questions until the designated Q&A portion at the end." It was a public neutering. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. He felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up his neck. The most galling part was Julian Croft. The man sat next to Isabella, the two of them operating with an easy, familiar synergy. He would lean in to whisper something to her, and she would nod a small, genuine smile, gracing her lips. A smile he hadn't seen in years. A raw, primitive jealousy ignited in Damien's chest. Who was this man to her? After the meeting, as people were filing out, Damien cornered her. He needed to talk to her to understand. "Isabella," he said, his voice low. She turned slowly, her face a mask of polite indifference. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have a business matter to discuss?" "Mr. Blackwood, don't play these games with me, Isabella." "What is this? A game revenge?" A flicker of something. Anger, pain flashed in her eyes before being extinguished. "This is business, something you taught me to value above all else. You saw Innovate Dynamics as an asset to be stripped. I see it as a company to be built." The board agreed with my vision. "And the baby?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Is that part of the vision too? Were you ever going to tell me?" She stepped closer, and for the first time he could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the toll this fight had taken on her. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with venom. "You forfeited the right to know anything about my personal life when you had your lawyer inform me our marriage was over. This baby is my personal life. You have no claim here. In this room, you are a shareholder. Outside of it, you are nothing. Are we understood?" She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, utterly defeated. Julian Croft was waiting for her by the door. He placed a gentle hand on her back as they walked out together, the gesture both supportive and possessive. Damien watched them go, the jealousy in his gut churning into a toxic cocktail of rage and regret. He had wanted her to disappear. Instead, she had reappeared as his judge, his jury, and his executioner, and he realized with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The Ice Queen had made her opening move, and it was checkmate before he even knew they were playing a new game. The city moved into autumn, and the seasons of power shifted with it. At Innovate Dynamics, the atmosphere was electric. The stale air of stagnation had been replaced by a current of palpable excitement. Isabella, now entering her third trimester, moved through the revitalized office not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of the company's rebirth. She led meetings with a sharp, intuitive grace, her ideas sparking vibrant debate and inspiring a level of creativity the company hadn't seen in a decade. Julian Croft was her constant second-in-command. Their partnership was a seamless blend of her strategic vision and his technical genius. They would spend hours whiteboarding complex schematics for their flagship project, Chimera, often pausing as Isabella would smile and place a hand on her belly, feeling the kick of the tiny life that was the silent third partner in all her endeavors. The staff saw a leader who was not weakened by her pregnancy, but fortified by it. She was building two futures at once, and her fierce protective energy enveloped the entire company. Miles away in the cold, silent halls of Blackwood Tower, a different kind of energy festered. Damien's world was contracting. The triumphant swagger was gone, replaced by a grim defensive crouch. In his board meetings, he was no longer a king addressing his court, but a defendant facing a panel of increasingly hostile judges. The Innovate Dynamics failure was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding on his balance sheets, and the rising star of Isabella Rossi was a constant humiliating reminder of his miscalculation. The market is interpreting this as a sign of weakness. Damien, one of his oldest board members, had said, his voice dripping with condescension. They're saying you lost your touch. That phrase, lost his touch, echoed in Damien's mind, a maddening drumbeat of inadequacy. He who had built an empire on his infallible instincts was being portrayed as a relic, and the person who had done it was the woman he had deemed too soft, too emotional for his world. The irony was a bitter pill he could not swallow. Desperation began to curdle his judgment. If he couldn't outmaneuver her in the open market, he would have to cripple her from within. It was a line he hadn't crossed since his earliest, most ruthless days. But Isabella had broken the unspoken rules first by humiliating him so publicly. In the warped logic of his bruised ego, he wasn't initiating a new conflict. He was merely escalating the war she had started. He would remind her and the world what happened when you poked a sleeping lion. His target was obvious Project Chimera. It was the heart of her new strategy, the vessel of all her future promises to the market. Its success would make her untouchable. Its failure would shatter her credibility and send the company into a death spiral. He began his shadow campaign, subtly tasking his most ruthless analysts to tear Chimera's code apart, to run diagnostics and stress tests on every pirated fragment they could obtain. Simultaneously, he leveraged his media contacts, planting anonymous seeds of doubt with influential financial journalists. Whispers began to circulate about the project's overstated potential and the inherent risks of its unproven, algorithmic foundation. But he needed an eye on the inside. He found his pawn in Victoria Sterling. Victoria was a senior vice president of sales, a relic of the old regime who wore her resentment like expensive perfume. She had been on a fast track to the C-suite before Isabella's arrival, and now found herself sidelined, her authority diminished by the rise of tech upstarts like Julian Croft, whom she loathed with a passion. Damien invited her to a discreet lunch at a Michelin-starred restaurant where private booths were guaranteed. He was a master at playing on human weakness, and he read Victoria's ambition and insecurity like a prospectus. "She's an amateur, Victoria," Damien said, swirling the wine in his glass. A sentimentalist playing CEO. This fascination the market has with her story. It's a bubble. And when it pops, the shareholders are going to be looking for stable, experienced leadership to pick up the pieces. He let that hang in the air before leaning in. They'll be looking for someone like you. Victoria's eyes lit with a greedy spark. She barely listens to my sales division. It's all about R&D now. It's all about Julian. Exactly. Damien affirmed, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. She's being led by the nose, by that glorified lab technician. She's letting her condition cloud her judgment. This Chimera project is a gamble that will bankrupt the company. We have a duty to the shareholders to protect them from her folly. He had framed his sabotage as a righteous act of corporate governance. He wasn't a villain, he was a guardian. Victoria, desperate to reclaim her relevance, readily agreed to be his inside source. The intel began to flow. Memos, internal progress reports, snippets of code. And then Victoria delivered the jackpot. Damien's tech team found it a critical flaw deep within Chimera's core algorithm. It was a recursive loop error that would only trigger under a specific sequence of high-pressure data, stacking a 1 in a million scenario, but one that could be replicated. Julian's team had logged the bug, classifying it as minor, and scheduling a patch for the next software update weeks away. Damien finally had his weapon. The upcoming live investor demonstration for Chimera was his chosen battlefield. He hired a discreet cybersecurity firm in Eastern Europe, paying them through a labyrinth of offshore accounts. Their mission was not a frontal assault, but a surgical strike. During the demo's climax, the high-stress simulation, they would feed the system a precise data packet designed to trigger the flaw, causing a catastrophic, unrecoverable system crash in front of the entire world. The day of the demonstration arrived, charged with anticipation. The auditorium at Innovate Dynamics was packed. Damien watched remotely from the command center of his office, the live feed displayed on a massive screen. He felt the familiar, thrilling pump of adrenaline, the godlike feeling of moving invisible pieces on a board. He had a private encrypted chat open with Victoria, who was in the audience. Stage is set. Everyone is here. She looks confident. Confidence is the companion of fools. Is the vulnerable code still on the presentation server? Confirmed this morning. Julian's patch isn't scheduled until next week. They haven't suspected a thing. A grim smile touched Damien's lips. On the stage, Isabella looked serene and powerful, her navy blue dress accentuating her advanced pregnancy. She spoke with a passion and clarity that for a fleeting moment caused an unwelcome pang in Damien's chest. Then Julian Croft stepped up to begin the technical demonstration, and Damien's resolve hardened into ice. The initial tests were flawless. Chimera handled complex logistics with an elegance that drew murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. Damien watched his heart, a steady, predatory drumbeat. He waited. And now, Julian announced, his voice filled with pride, for the final test. We will simulate a full-scale, city-wide logistics crisis, a port shutdown, a bridge collapse, and a transit strike, all at once. This is the ultimate pressure test. This was it. Damien leaned forward, his eyes locked on the screen. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to give the final command to his hired hackers. Execute, he typed. On the giant screen behind Julian, data streams became raging torrents. The system's processing load spiked to critical levels. Damien held his breath, a cruel sense of victory blooming in his chest. Fall apart, he willed it. Crash and burn. Show them all. The system processed. It calculated. It hesitated for a single, heart-stopping nanosecond. And then it held. Not only did it hold, but it adapted with breathtaking speed, seamlessly rerouting thousands of virtual assets, its performance becoming even more efficient under the immense pressure. The simulation concluded with a perfect, elegant solution. The auditorium was silent for a beat, then erupted in a thunderous wave of applause. Damien stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was impossible. He looked at his chat with Victoria. She was typing frantically. What happened? It should have crashed. On the stage, Isabella stepped forward, a calm, knowing smile on her face. She let the applause die down before she spoke, her voice clear and carrying a new chilling edge. "Thank you," she said. "We are, of course, thrilled with Chimera's performance. We were also aware that certain parties might have an unusual interest in the outcome of today's demonstration." A hush fell over the room. Damien's blood ran cold. Isabella's eyes found the primary broadcast camera, and it felt as if she were looking right through the screen, directly into his soul. "Which is why," she continued, her voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "we took certain precautions. Several weeks ago, our security team detected a low-level unauthorized probe of our network. In response, we created a honeypot, a decoy version of the Chimera network. The version on our main servers, the one that has been secretly probed and prodded, was an older build left in place with a specific known vulnerability. The demonstration you just witnessed was running on a completely separate, hardened and fully patched private server." She paused, letting the devastating implication land. Damien felt the air leave his lungs. It was a trap. The entire thing was a meticulously crafted trap. "We take corporate espionage very seriously at Innovate Dynamics," Isabella concluded, her voice now like ice. "And every single digital fingerprint, every packet of data sent to our decoy has been logged, traced, and analyzed. We have an irrefutable trail leading directly from the attempted intrusion right back to its source. Our legal team has already been in contact with the relevant authorities." Damien's world dissolved. The smug confidence, the rage, the pride, it all collapsed into sheer, unadulterated terror. He hadn't been the hunter. He had been the clueless beast walking into a snare she had built just for him. His phone buzzed violently on the desk. The caller ID read, "Marcus Vance." He numbly answered it. "Damien!" His lawyer's voice was a frantic squawk of panic. "It's over. They had everything. They contacted the cybersecurity firm you used with a mountain of evidence. Timestamps, IP addresses, payment trails. They're flipping, Damien. They're giving you up to get a deal." Damien dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, but he didn't hear it. All he could hear was the ringing in his ears. All he could see was Isabella's face on the screen, poised, triumphant, and utterly merciless. He had tried to sabotage her future, and in doing so had vaporized his own. The king was not just checkmated, he had been swept from the board entirely. The world ended not with a bang, but with the silent, ceaseless scroll of headlines on a 60-inch plasma screen. Damien sat in the cavernous living room of his penthouse, the sky outside turning a bruised purple as dusk settled over Manhattan. The Dom Perignon from his premature celebration days ago was still on the bar, its bottle now a monument to his folly. For 2 days he had been a ghost in his own life, watching his legacy be systematically dismantled in the court of public opinion. Blackwood's dirty war. Inside the sabotage plot at Innovate Dynamics. Fallen Titan. Damien Blackwood faces SEC Investigation Board. Ouster imminent. From predator to prey. How Isabella Rossi outmaneuvered a corporate raider. His phone, lying on the marble coffee table, had ceased its incessant ringing and now just pulsed with a steady, overwhelming stream of notifications. Frantic emails from Marcus, summons from the board, scathing messages from investors who had once hailed him as a king. He ignored them all. They were just noise, the chatter of a kingdom that was no longer his. He had spent the first 24 hours in a state of pure, incandescent rage. He'd paced the length of his apartment, the plush carpets unable to soften the harsh, angry sound of his footsteps. He'd replayed every move, every interaction, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he had lost control. But it was like trying to catch smoke. She had been ahead of him the entire time, her quiet resilience, a force he had fatally underestimated. Now the anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something far worse, a vast, echoing emptiness. In that void, the ugly truth began to take root. He looked around the sterile, perfect apartment. He had curated this life with the same ruthless precision he applied to his portfolio, stripping away anything sentimental, anything that couldn't be quantified, anything that felt like a vulnerability. He had mistaken emotion for weakness, and in doing so had performed a radical amputation on his own soul. He had streamlined his life right into ruin. His gaze fell on a small framed photo on a side table. One of the few personal items he'd allowed. It was from their honeymoon in Amalfi. Isabella was laughing, her head thrown back, the sun catching the light in her hair. He remembered that moment. She had just coaxed him into a tiny, rickety boat run by a local fisherman, convincing him to abandon his meticulously planned schedule for an hour. For 60 minutes, he hadn't been Damien Blackwood, CEO. He had just been a man happy and in love, drifting on the turquoise water. The memory, so pure and simple, had terrified him back then. It was a deviation from the plan, a moment of joy he hadn't engineered or controlled. It felt dangerous. And there it was. The answer to the question that now haunted his every waking thought. With a clarity that was both agonizing and liberating, he knew what he had to do. This couldn't end with lawyers and press releases. It had to end where it began, with her. He didn't call his driver. He took the elevator down to the garage, got into his Aston Martin, a car he usually only drove on weekends, and merged into the river of city traffic. The world outside his tinted windows looked different. The city he'd always seen as his chessboard now felt like a living, breathing entity that was utterly indifferent to him. The faces of people crossing the street were not statistics or consumers. They were just people living lives as complex and fraught as his own. Stripped of his power, he was finally seeing the world as it was. Pulling up to the Innovate Dynamics building, he felt a tremor of something he couldn't name. It wasn't fear of a business rival, but the profound dread of a man about to face his chief accuser, a judge he had appointed himself through his own actions. He walked into the lobby, his presence creating a ripple of silence. The receptionist looked up, her eyes wide. He didn't stop. He strode to the executive elevator and rode it up the ascent, feeling like a slow climb to the gallows. Isabella's executive assistant, a sharp young woman named Clara, stood up as he approached the office doors. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry she's not—" "I know," he said, his voice quiet but firm, and walked past on her before she could protest further. He found Isabella in her office. She was standing by the vast floor-to-ceiling window, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, the other on the cool glass. She wasn't looking down at his tower, but out toward the horizon, where the last vestiges of sunlight were surrendering to the night. She looked like a queen surveying her domain, a world she had built not from rubble, but from the potential he had been too blind to see. She didn't turn. She had heard him enter, had felt the shift in the air. "I told Clara I wasn't to be disturbed, Damien." Her voice was heavy with a weariness that went far beyond the long hours of a CEO. It was the exhaustion of a soldier after a long, brutal war. He stopped in the center of the room, feeling like an intruder in this space she commanded so effortlessly. "I'm not here about the company." He said the words feeling foreign and inadequate in his mouth. "I know it's over. They're firing me tomorrow. You won." "This was never about winning," she replied, her back still to him. Her voice was low, but it cut through the silence of the room. "Winning is your language, Damien. This was about surviving. This was about building something that couldn't be taken away from me. You're the one who turned it into a war." "I know." The admission was a surrender, a white flag raised over the smoking ruins of his pride. "I was wrong." Finally she turned. Her eyes, which had held such icy command in the boardroom, were now unguarded, shadowed with a pain that he had inflicted. They swept over him, taking in his disheveled state, the raw defeat etched onto his face. For a moment he saw a flicker of the woman he had married, a hint of sorrow for the man standing before her. Why? The question was barely a whisper, but it held the weight of all their shared history. "That's what I don't understand. Why did you do it? Not just the sabotage, all of it." She took a step forward, her voice gaining a tremor of resurrected agony. "Why did you throw us away? Was it so easy to have your lawyer call to push those papers across the desk as if you were closing a trivial account? Was I so insignificant to you?" The raw, unfiltered pain in her voice struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had no defense, no excuse, only the truth. "No!" He choked out the word, thick with unshed tears. He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-recrimination. "No, Isabella. You weren't insignificant. You were the most significant thing in my life. And that terrified me." He took a hesitant step closer, bridging the vast space that had grown between them. "My entire life, my entire identity, was built on control. I control the market. I control my assets. I control my image. Everything is a variable to be managed. But I couldn't control you. And I couldn't control how I felt about you." His voice broke. "You were this brilliant, beautiful force of nature that didn't fit into any of my spreadsheets. And loving you, it felt like a risk. It felt like a liability to my ambition. In my twisted worldview, it felt weak." A harsh, broken sound that might have been a laugh escaped his lips. "I told myself I was being logical, that our lives were diverging. I told myself I was streamlining, optimizing for success, but I was just a coward. I was terrified of a feeling I couldn't command. So I did what I always do with a perceived threat. I neutralized it. I pushed you away." The confession poured out of him a torrent of regret. "And when I saw you on that television screen, so powerful, so poised, and with our child, all that arrogance just shattered. It wasn't just jealousy, Izzy. It was awe. And in that moment, I saw the full scale of my stupidity. I didn't just lose a wife. I threw away the best part of myself. I tried to tear you down because I couldn't bear the light of your success when I was in the dark. It was petty. It was monstrous. And I am so sorry." Tears were now streaming down his face, hot and shameful. The powerful Damien Blackwood was gone, replaced by this broken man, finally confessing his sins. Isabella stood frozen, her own tears welling in her eyes, silent witnesses to his unraveling. The apology was everything she had once longed to hear, and it had arrived a lifetime too late. She saw the ghost of the man she had loved, the passionate, vulnerable man he'd kept locked away. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand never leaving the protective curve of her stomach. "Your apology. I hear it, Damien. I even believe it." Her voice was soft but firm. "But it doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't erase the months of fear or the coldness in your eyes when you handed me my walking papers. Words can't rebuild a world that you burned to the ground." "I know," he whispered. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance with you. I destroyed that. But the baby..." His gaze dropped to her stomach, and his expression shifted into one of desperate pleading hope. He or she, they didn't do anything to deserve this. They deserve a father. If you'll let me, I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life earning the right to be in their life. Not as your husband, but as their father. I'll be the man you always deserved." As he spoke, he saw a change in her expression, a sharp intake of breath. Her eyes widened not from his words, but from an internal shock. She gasped a low sound of pain, and her free hand flew to her lower back, her body tensing. Isabella. Damien's own drama. His regret, his entire crumbling world evaporated in an instant, replaced by a surge of pure primal alarm. He rushed forward, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. "What is it? What's wrong?" She braced herself against her large oak desk, her knuckles white. She squeezed her eyes shut, breathing through another wave of intense pressure. When it passed, she looked at him, her face pale, but her eyes clear. "The baby," she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and inevitability. I think it's time." In the sterile, quiet atmosphere of the hospital, the war between them fell away, replaced by a fragile truce. Damien was there not as a titan of industry, but as a humbled man holding Isabella's hand as she brought their daughter Amelia into the world. He didn't get his company back. He faced legal battles and public disgrace, forced to rebuild his life from the ground up. But in losing everything he thought he wanted, he gained the one thing he truly needed: a chance at redemption. Isabella, now a celebrated CEO and a mother, didn't give him an easy path. She didn't take him back. Instead, she offered him something more challenging and more meaningful: the opportunity to co-parent, to prove through actions, not words, that he had truly changed. Their story wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a messy, realistic, and hopeful new beginning. What a roller coaster of emotion, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. Isabella's journey from a heartbroken wife to a powerhouse CEO is a testament to the power of resilience. But the biggest question remains: can Damien truly be redeemed? Can a man who caused so much pain ever truly earn back trust and become the father his daughter deserves? What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were in Isabella's shoes, what would you have done? If you were captivated by this story of love loss and incredible revenge, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps our channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a drama that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another one of our gripping tales. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.